Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff.
Welcome to Donuts and Bikes, the mountain biking coaching podcast. Your hosts are Paul Howard and me, Christian Jackson, and we're here to discuss the skills, techniques, and concepts we've used over the last 20 years to improve your riding or coaching. Enjoy the show. All right, we are live again. Hey, Paul, see you're back looks like you're back in Canada.
Yeah, Buzz. Yeah, back in the cold.
Has it gotten cold there already?
Yeah, it was a bit chilly last night. It was like -6 or something. But yeah, I was in 30 degrees a few days ago, so it's a bit of a shock, but good to be home. Been snowboarding already. What have you been up to?
Yeah, same except skiing.
Yeah.
Got in several days so far. We had a slow start to our ski season here, but I've been back at it and enjoying that transition. We're still like I'm getting ready to go ride my mountain bike here in a little bit and then go ski later. So it's kind of in that zone where you can still do both,
Nice.
which is a bit odd. It definitely makes for a lot of it's a very gear intensive kind of day to where everything goes, but really enjoy that this time of year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shock going from the sun to the snow so quickly, but it's cool, you know. Like I was thinking the other day when I was in Byron, like our routine was like we'd go to the beach for a swim, and then we'd go home, have breakfast, work for a part of the day, or do homeschool with the kids, and then in the afternoon we kind of go back to the beach and chill out. But in the mornings it was cool because you'd go down and there's like at least 50 retired people every morning in Byron Bay. They'd walk like 2K up the beach and then swim back to the surf club. And I mean, I guess the average age was like 60 plus.
Yeah.
But these retired people were just out there every morning. Didn't matter what the weather was or what the surf was. Like they did that walk and swim every morning. And it was just so cool. It kind of made me feel a little bit like Whistler or where I live here in Pemberton or the Sea to Sky. Like it's pretty inspiring because as soon as you feel like you're getting too old, then you look around the corner and there's someone else 10 years older than you, like shredding just as hard or harder. You know, I kind of felt like that, and I feel like that in Australia on the coast. Like it's a pretty inspiring place to be when you're trying to just go for a little jog in the morning or a little swim, but then this old deer's just done a 2K walk and a 2K ocean swim and looks absolutely fine as well. They're not even tired.
I wonder if it's a factor of this longevity that you're pointing out here is a factor of people being attracted to these natural areas like the beach or the mountains.
Yeah.
Purposefully. Like, is there anything to that?
Yeah, totally.
I see that.
Correct. Sorry, for sure.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a chicken or the egg thing, I bet, but I definitely, I was out climbing with some buddies recently, and I was the youngest one, and at least by 10 years, maybe in 15 or more than in one case.
That's awesome.
The guy leading all of the hardest routes was 68, and we were having this conversation. He's like, well, he was thinking like, what's going to happen in my next 15 years? You know, am I going to be able to keep climbing? And you know, we talked about that for quite a bit. And it's like, well, if you don't stop climbing, it's going to be easier to keep going.
Yeah, totally.
And you know, it's kind of like we said with you know, getting old and mountain biking, same kind of thing. And I think there's a lot to be said for just simply staying with it, with whatever physical activity that you're doing, staying with it. And it's so awesome to have people in my life that are 10, 15 years older that are inspirational to me. And, when it's cold and rainy and I don't want to go ride my bike,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you know, what would Gordon do? Would he, make hot cocoa and sit by the fire? Or would he go for a bike ride? I'm like, well, I probably need to go for a bike ride.
Yeah, totally.
And the hardest part of it is, especially this time of year when it's less than ideal for biking, or even skiing. It's like the hardest part for me is simply making the decision to do it.
Yeah, once you're out, you're fine.
You're good, no matter really what.
I think in that sense, we're the same as kids. Like kids suck at transitions from like going inside to outside, and you have to drag themselves, get them dressed, get their gear on. Like they're a nightmare at transitions. But as soon as they're out, they're loving it. They're loving it. And I think adults are the same in that sense. Yeah, man, it's cool. So, we were chatting earlier, like, I guess it's about 1 year of podcasting, 1 year of Donuts and Bikes.
It is.
Which sounds kind of crazy. I mean, we started this just for a bit of fun and a bit of a laugh and to share some things we're so passionate about with coaching and biking. And how's it gone for you? Like, if we reflect back on the last year on the podcast, like, how do you feel about it?
To begin with, man, I feel really good. And one of the tools I use to help me think about what I'm getting out of whatever it is I'm doing, mountain biking, coaching, being a parent, cooking, is what sort of satisfaction is the thing producing for me, and then what kind of outcome is that same thing creating? And I think with cooking, like the times where I feel intrinsic motivation and satisfaction from cooking a meal, and then setting it all out and we all enjoy it. Thanksgiving dinner, for instance, or whatever. And so those are the kind of the criteria I use to kind of evaluate what I'm getting out of something. And when I think about the podcast, like it's been so incredibly satisfying to think about what we're going to talk about, plan it out to the extent that we do plan, and have all the conversations, the insights, the text exchange, et cetera. Like there's a lot of intrinsic satisfaction that comes back to me for that. And talking with handfuls of people in person that have listened to the show and want to have conversation about, X, Y, or Z that we've discussed, gives me that signal that other people are enjoying it as well. So I want to keep it going for sure. What about you?
I think it's been really cool. I really liked that it's just another medium to coach through, really. Like, I've done a lot of writing about biking and writing about coaching, and I've obviously done a lot of face-to-face coaching. But, trying to sort of educate listeners about riding skills or coaching skills through a podcast. I mean, it's a completely different way to kind of apply your skill set or apply your knowledge. And so I've really enjoyed that process, and I hope that's kind of come through on the podcast. And I'd love to do more. I'd love to do more of the podcast. It's a little challenging because I think both you and I are kind of strapped for bandwidth and time. So I'd be interested to see if the listeners would be open to maybe things like we're looking at maybe some subscriber or Patreon accounts, or maybe some merchandise with a Donuts and Bikes store, like kind of moving the podcast into that next stage of progression, that is kind of evolution to maybe the next level, and whether we want to do that or can do that. So any thoughts on that from the listeners, please let us know. Just give us a comment on Instagram, and we'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that, because I think we're both on the same page. We're loving it, and we want to keep doing it, and it's just whether we can make that viable. But we'll see. It's fun for now, at least. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, I think take a lot of there's a lot of value for the comments and the ideas that we get on through the Instagram messages as well. It's interesting to interact with the coaches out there all over the world.
Yeah.
With ideas and such. That's just, it's kind of a neat thing to think about, how far, this medium does communicate.
Yeah, it's cool looking at the stats, like, South Africa and New Zealand and Chile and, I mean, obviously US and Canada and UK and stuff, but some of the other locations and regions where people are downloading the podcast, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
What are we doing in this episode, Paul?
What are we doing today? I think today we're going to do part 3 of 78 of cornering. I think we joked in an earlier episode that, like, cornering is really going to be a series of lots of different episodes, because you can't just talk about cornering in one podcast. So yeah, we just want to do another series in the cornering realm and talk about some ideas, concepts, skills to improve our cornering. And oh dear, didn't turn my phone off. That's my mistake. But getting into cornering. And I think the last one we looked mostly at steering and angulation. So we'll maybe pick a different skill component today to dig into. But yeah, it's why do you think it's such a hot topic? I mean, obviously it's such a big piece of our riding, but why do you think people get so excited about cornering tips or cornering videos? Or
yeah, it's a great question. I think that fundamentally it comes down to jumps for the thrills, corners to pay the bills. Think about racing and going fast. If that's your thing, races are often won and lost in corners. Kind of a common way of thinking about this, for sure. But like, you dial that back and peel back the racing aspect from it. Learning to corner is very difficult, and so I think one of the outcomes to that is the fact that there are so many YouTube videos, Instagram reels, suggestions, like this. There is a ton of this stuff out there, so there's a demand for it, or there's a perceived demand to teach how to do this. It just personally from coaching people in cornering, it's something that's difficult to learn. It's not just from a rider's perspective. There's so much going on that it's difficult to learn. And plus, I think also we get little taste of successful cornering, and we can kind of get good in our own little way, and then we come to a different kind of corner, and it doesn't make sense anymore. We want to get frustrated. We want to learn more.
I almost think like it's, in a way, in some ways it's easy to learn, but it's difficult to master.
Yeah, it's a good way to say it.
Like, you can find these little pieces to add to your skill set and get better, but every time you get better, you're still aware that you could still be better than you are. So you're sort of constantly chasing the carrot. I think that's why, for me at least, that's why it's such a big part of my focus in my riding. Is like, it doesn't matter how good I get. I'm just constantly aware that I'm not as good as I could be.
Right, exactly. I mentioned earlier, Paul, that I just started ski instructing officially for the first time here, and starting out as a rookie instructor and learning the ropes on that. But it's pretty excited to go on this journey as a mountain bike coach. And just kind of see how that's going to work out. The first thing I'm really kind of drawn to is the fact that, skiing is turning, and all of the ingredients for good skiing is really about making a good turn and linking those turns together in variety.
Did they, was your instructional video the South Park scene, the pizza and French fries?
I forgot about that one.
I think that's what they show all the new ski instructors is.
They
If you
should.
do a French fry when you're supposed to do a pizza, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah, for sure.
We get the cross country snowboarding video. That's what we show.
Cross countries.
That's what we show the new snowboard instructors. Can't do downhill snowboarding until you first do cross country snowboarding.
That's the progression.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that we focus on in this first little training session I went to was the fun factor.
Yeah.
You know, for most people that take a ski lesson around here, there's a 68% chance that they won't take another one.
Yeah.
You know, and therefore, you know, showing them a good time, showing them how to keep themselves safe, but more how to have fun. And I think that's where like the cornering for us can really, we can really dive into that, because cornering well feels good.
Yeah.
It feels good. It's very satisfying to put it all together, and I'm very excited to dive into it.
Yeah, it feels like I think that's the carrot, right? Like when you get it right and you carry speed and you didn't break that hard, and you just feel like you have that grip through the corner. I mean, it is one of the best feelings on a bike. So that's what makes you keep searching for the holy grail, right?
Yeah.
Cool. One thing I've been noticing recently especially on Instagram a bunch, is a lot of coaches putting videos of themselves or their riders. I don't know if you've seen this, where someone's going through a fairly flat corner, a fairly innocuous kind of mellow corner, but they're really trying to emphasize rotation or angulation, but they're riding at like 5 miles an hour. So that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. What are your thoughts on that? Have you seen those videos? Like, what's your reaction to those as a coach when you see some of these videos that are obviously intended to mean well, but there's something missing there, and we can get into that maybe.
I think there are a bunch of folks out there that are doing this, that are contributing a lot of ideas. You know, don't want to be dismissive of anybody that's projecting their ideas via that medium, for sure. The thing that I think about, though, and what you're referring to, is the idea of exaggeration, where the exaggeration of body movements. And I heard a statement the other day that demos, when you show somebody something, you should exaggerate. Which, the way I interpret that, is that you're doing what the rotation, the angulation, whatever it is, you're doing it more than you normally would, because the students, you exaggerate because the students are only going to do about 20% of what you do.
Yeah.
And I get that concept. However, I feel like modeling the right amount at the right speed for the right terrain can then help focus the lesson towards what we're actually trying to do.
Yeah.
Instead of creating something where we're doing too much of something, or doing it too soon or too late or whatever, as a means of the primary message, then we might have, as a coach, we might have to then undo some of the learning, which is like, well, we don't want to. Let's build lessons that we don't have to undo later. Let's keep building lessons that we can build upon and build upon and build upon.
Hey, gang. So we'd like to take a moment here just to check in and ask if you've had your donut yet this week. Maybe you haven't, and all you need is a little inspiration. Well, keep listening to the end of the show, where we talk about all things sugar and delight with our featured donut of the week, and see if it helps you motivate you towards some healthier eating decisions. And remember, after all, donuts make you happy, and happy people are healthier. All right, back to the show.
Totally, and I think that's a really good point. Like, because that's what you see in these Instagram videos, is people are meaning well, and that's what I love. Like, it's good information, but often it's not quite connecting with a student, because there's one very little simple thing that's missing, which is, it could be something as simple as like I'll often talk about demonstrations in terms of you've got to demonstrate the technique for sure. And that's often what people are doing. Like you mentioned there, they're exaggerating the movement so that the student can see it, because otherwise the student might not have a keen eye to actually see the movement. Or you exaggerate it. I quite like the word emphasize, like emphasize the movement so that the student might, if you do 4 inches, they'll do 1 inch, right? So again, you're trying to emphasize the technique for that. But technique is one piece of a demo. I think the other 2 pieces of a demo are the speed and intensity. So sometimes these demos are really focusing on the technique, but they're not necessarily showing a good picture of the speed or the intensity. So a classic one for cornering is if you're demonstrating rotation is primarily a skill that's a movement that's applied at higher speed corners and or more dynamic short radius turns, where you've got a small radius corner, but you're trying to get around it pretty quickly. So you need that rotational input from the rider on top of the bike. So it's understanding about, when and how much do I apply this technique? Because a lot of the time I'll see these demos or videos online, and you could literally go around that corner sitting down, which tells me that you don't need to teach rotation for a corner that speed or a corner that radius. And that's usually a great way as a rider or as a coach to understand when and how much to use some of these skills. Like if I can go around that corner at trail speed and sit down, then I don't really need to do much rotation or angulation. But if I go around that corner at trail speed and I can't sit down and I have to stand up and I have to be active, then that's showing me that I actually need to angulate, or I actually need to do some rotation, or usually it's a combination of both of the 2 of them. But I think that's just one thing I wanted to highlight at the top here with cornering is, if today we focus on rotation, whatever it is you're working on your own cornering, don't just purely focus on the technique. Like think about the when and how much, the speed and the intensity of the techniques, because often that's the piece that either isn't explained or shown properly or isn't understood properly. So someone might be able to rotate their hips on the bike very purposefully through some slow arcs in a field between some cones. But if we're going through mellow corners on a green and blue run, you probably don't need to rotate anyway, and you could probably just focus on your body position. But then conversely, when you get onto a trail and you do increase your speed, do increase your intensity, whether it's the turn radius or something else, then really at that point, that's where we need to bring in that rotation. So sometimes those slower speed demos, those slower speed trials, don't often always create the outcomes that we want for the rider. So usually if it's a slower speed corner, I'll typically just focus on body position, line choice, and body position, braking, and line choice, like the first 3 skills. If you can tidy those up, you can do so much more with that cornering without having to do these kind of awkward, slow rotation, angulation demos that often are just actually making them feel less balanced, less stable, because they're moving too much when they don't necessarily have the forces or the speed for those movements to make sense. Just wanted to touch on that.
To focus that together into the idea of performance and varying degrees of performance, as a coach trying to understand to what degree of performance in any certain corner are we trying to get our rider to, and then using that then to help drive one of our tactics. And that's something that's it's hard to do all of that in an Instagram video. You see a handful of folks that I've seen a few folks do that, where they break apart things at different speeds, different kinds of performance levels. But it takes there's a lot of purposeful content creation that needs to go into that to get all of that together into one.
Yeah. And I think that's where some of the messaging gets lost in some of these simple posts, Instagram posts or little YouTube videos, is it doesn't quite dig into the details, the timing, the coordination, the progression. Like, as an example for me, if I'm teaching somebody rotation, it's because they're cornering pretty well already.
Yep.
And they need an extra movement to create more drive or more performance or more grip because they're already cornering quite fast. So I might introduce it with some slow cornering between some cones as a way to just show the rotational movements and to get them to feel it. But pretty quickly in that progression, we'll develop it with some faster speeds, some different size turns. We'll explore with some different movements, maybe rotating with the knees instead of the hips, or the knees and the hips. If I'm doing any kind of slow, very purposeful rotational demo, it's at the start of a progression to actually get the rider to, okay, now let's apply this at a real speed with a real intensity. And that's where we're going to feel the true benefit of this rotation. But yeah, that full progression that kind of often gets missed in these short online videos, and then the message can kind of get misconstrued when that wasn't necessarily what was intended.
Exactly. Yeah. I really like that idea about, as a coach, looking at your rider and seeing what additional movements do they need.
Yeah.
Like what's missing from their performance at this level, what I'm seeing, what's going to take them to the next level. And that, that's when we start using the when and how much. It's one thing to know how to rotate in a corner, but then when do you do it? How much do you do it? To what intensity, the duration, and all that then becomes the tools that we use.
For sure. And that's where I kind of stack up things like active angulation and active steering, active rotation. So that kind of angulation and rotation, like, they're the elements I'm going to add to someone's cornering after they can already corner pretty well because their position's dialed, their breaking points are dialed, or their trail breaking is dialed, and their line choice is dialed. So with those three skills, you can do some really good cornering already, because there will always be naturally some angulation. People will naturally let the bike lean to a certain point, especially if their position and balance is strong, their stability on the bike is strong. So, and they may even actually start just gently rotating already. They'll inherently start looking through a corner, their shoulders will twist, their hips will start to twist. So if we, like any coaching model, if you can just spend more time on the fundamentals, often the student will start to just work on the higher end skills already. So then as a coach, when you actually start to teach them, it's way easier. I've seen so many lessons with coaches trying to teach angulation, leaning the bike more than the rider, or teaching rotation, and it's just made the rider worse. They've got confused. They're dropping the inside pedal down. They're doing all sorts of funky things, and that's just a sign that the first three skills aren't there yet.
I think another message to this is just a reminder to all of us that those first three skills we can use to teach cornering. It's not that we have this, these cornering lessons ready to go without that. It's like we have, that is, position and cornering is a lesson in and of itself.
Yeah. I mean, I would hedge to guess like 80% of my cornering lessons are position and balance and working on that stability, and braking and line choice. It's those first three kind of components. Yeah, for sure.
So how about this next idea here of that we've kicked around this fireside conversation, so to speak, but who has more control in corners, the rider or physics?
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends who's on the bike. If it was Sam Hill, I would say Sam Hill has more control. That's a good one. I like that. I think often with that, what I like about that question is it highlights the need for the rider to be active, to control the forces acting upon them. Because if the rider doesn't quite do that, the physics, the forces, they will take over and they will push the rider in a direction they don't want to go, whether it's down on the ground or straight over the turn and into the trees. But it's a nice way of framing the fact that if we want to be better at cornering, we need to understand what forces are involved, and then how do we move against or with those forces to make that bike change direction the way we want.
Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a progression here through skill development, and in the beginning, in the learning stages of mountain biking, physics is probably more control.
Yeah.
And because we're still learning what those forces are, and how movements then interact with those forces. And the end goal is that we are in control, at all times on the bike.
Yeah, we want to be driving, not surviving. That's our catchphrase, right? Yeah. We'll tell the bike where to go, and not let the terrain tell you where to go, or not let the forces tell you where to go.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, we solved that one. That was easy.
Perfect.
Skill components of cornering. You want to talk about inclination today, or you want to talk about rotation?
Maybe if we kind of mentioned rotation a little bit before,
okay.
So maybe if we stick on that one, and we'll kind of use rotation a little bit more today. And then I think it'd be cool to do a future episode where we talk about leaning with the bike and how that can actually help us on things like flat corners, because that always sparks people's interest. And but we'll dig that into another episode. So maybe if we just stick on the rotation today. So, and again, the context here is, if we're teaching rotation, we've got some intermediate riders. They're pretty comfortable with some berms and some flat corners, and they're looking for that next level of grip, consistency, performance, confidence. They want to do a bit more driving through the corner and less just I'm standing on top of my bike through the corner.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Paul and I are stoked to be doing this podcast. If you're enjoying the show and want to support us, please take a moment to share our podcast with your friends, your family, colleagues, neighbors, really anybody you know, by letting them know how they can find us and listen for free on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever they get their podcast. The more love we get, the more episodes we can create. All right, back to the show.
For me, I feel like if I get a sense that introducing rotation is going to be really challenging for them, I'll always go back to that stability on the bike, working on their position. And if they're more stable, they'll also have more mobility and they'll have that freedom to move. So I always think of that first skill, position and balance, or stability and balance, we're calling it now these days. It's a sliding scale. It's not they have it, they don't have it. And where are they on that sliding scale? And they might be quite confident. They might be quite centered. They might be quite stable with quite good balance. But let's see if we can dial that up a little bit more so that when we do ask them to move a certain way, they can do it. Whether it's moving their body or whether it's moving the bike. Say, hey, try moving the bike underneath you, or hey, try twisting your hips. If they're really struggling with just a simple movement, it's just telling us to, hey, go back to the drawing board, go back to that first skill. But back to rotation, I think the classic one we often hear is that, belly button, shine your belly button into the turn, right? Which is really the core, the hips, really, essentially. Turning the pelvis. Sometimes I like to just flip it on its head and just start with the feet and have a student just stand on the ground off their bike, and they'll stand next to their bike, so their hands are on the handlebars, but I'll just ask them to twist their feet in the gravel or twist their feet on the ground and pay attention to how did they do that? What other movements or muscles did they use to get their feet to kind of twist in the dirt? And that's just a nice way often to, because a lot of the time riders have heard twist your belly button into the turn, or some variation like that. So sometimes I quite like to just start with a different body part, just to A, make it fresh, but B, get them to realize that ultimately, if I'm going to turn my hips or my knees, the idea is to A, create some rotational alignment, rotational balance over the bike, and B is to potentially create a bit of a rotational force or torque into the bike. So if I'm doing that, I should ultimately start to feel some kind of tension or rotational twist in the feet. Because if you're twisting your hips and that doesn't get translated down through to the knees, through to the feet, then the bike's not going to feel that movement as much. You're not creating that sort of torque that you might want, which helps the bike change direction. So, but I think, going back to what rotation is and why, people often kind of misconstrue this idea that rotation is to sort of twist the bike underneath you, especially in a tight corner, so then you can change direction quicker. And that's not necessarily wrong, but often I think what gets missed in the explanation is it's really about rotational balance. So if you're going through a corner and you draw a line from the rider's head through their kind of spine out through their pelvis, and a line and a second line along the top tube of the bike, you want the line, that kind of spine line through the rider, to be rotationally ahead of the bike. So if the bike slides, it just catches up with the rider, and it's almost like the bike and rider are back to neutral. So that's kind of rotational balance in a way, because we're just anticipating, we're just ahead of the bike slightly from a rotational perspective through the turn. And not only is that a stronger, more balanced position to guide the bike through the turn, but if the bike does slide, it catches us up. On the other hand, if we haven't twisted our body and we're not rotationally ahead of the bike and it does start to slide, the back wheel does start to slide out, well, now from a rotational perspective, the bike is ahead of us in the turn. And that's where the rider now has a really hard time to balance and react and recover. So I think sometimes the why is like, there's a lot of talk about, you can drive the bike, you can twist, you can make it kind of change direction real quickly. And that's a very high level performance move. And most of the time we're not actually needing that, or we're not even doing that. We're just simply trying to twist the body ahead of the bike so that we're in a more rotationally balanced position as the bike and the rider turn, basically go through an arc, basically. So yeah, I thought it'd be good just to sort of mention a little bit about what and why in terms of rotation, and just to clarify that. And then in terms of the how, I think the feet are a fun place to start. It's a little bit fresh, a little bit different. Yeah.
I like this idea of being ahead of the bike, using this movement to be ahead of the bike. I find that very, very useful in thinking about being in control. Yeah. And how problematic it is to be having the bike ahead of us. Yeah. In a corner. And, personally have felt that before, when things have gotten wonky.
Like another good analogy is like, if you think of a G out at the bottom of a rock roll, if you go slightly ahead of the bike in terms of like fore aft position, you kind of do that a lot of the time on a G out, because the bike's going to accelerate a lot in that G out, and then it kind of comes back underneath you, and then you ride away and high five, and it feels great. And so you know that feeling of going slightly ahead of the bike, because in that moment it's actually going to be a lot more balanced for you as you go through the G out.
Yeah, totally.
So we're trying to do the same here in a corner with rotation, but just, from a rotational perspective rather than a kind of a fore aft perspective.
Love it. Yeah. Right. I do like the feet piece as well, keeping it simple. And you're really starting that idea of the kinesthetic chain, there's a lot of things that can rotate on our body, but if we start at the feet, knees, hips, shoulders, that can help build getting us stacked when we're doing
Yeah.
this, which kind
I
of
think
leads
it's
it.
nice too, because from the start, it just highlights that we're not, if we pick one body part, it's not just try and twist your feet. It's like, actually, if I'm going to twist my feet, I actually need to move my shoulders, my hips, my knees. I kind of need to move everything to twist my feet. I think sometimes when you introduce the hips, they tend to they'll only twist their hips, but nothing else. And then it feels and looks really awkward, and it doesn't actually create the outcome we want.
Yeah, well, it's going to come back to that in just a second, but this sometimes get the question when we do focus on the feet of, are the feet actually rotating on the pedals?
Yeah.
With this,
nice.
and the answer to that is to a degree, when you put enough force onto them, they are moving a bit, but they're not actually rotating like over the spindle. They're just the word that's coming to mind is body English.
Yeah.
Where you're putting that rotational force is being delivered to the grip of your foot, and so you're not actually rotating the feet, but the rotational forces are being applied there.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're standing on loose dirt and you try and twist your feet, they'll probably slip, right? And you will actually twist your feet. But then say if you stand on the road and you've got really good grip on your shoes, all you'll create is that tension in the shoe. You'll kind of create that tension with your socks and your feet in the shoe. But the shoe won't actually really twist on the road, right? And it would be the same if you clipped in, or if you've got a good, flat pedal with good pins. Like the shoe won't technically twist on the pedal, but you'll feel that tension in your feet, in your shoe, as you're trying to sort of just rotate slightly.
Yeah, totally. Now let's transition a bit into how we coach people to rotate. In the instructor trainings that we do with PMBIA, we cover this in our level two courses, and it's something that's not necessarily easy to learn how to teach. And my thoughts on the why of this is primarily because there's a lot of biomechanical movement that's involved, and it's hard to analyze what actually is going on in a rider's body when they're rotating, because you can get so many different kind of planes either working against each other or at angles that are hard to discern exactly what's going on here.
Yeah.
It's so really wanted to highlight this next bit about some just tips for analysis. Like as the coach, when we're teaching rotation to our rider that's ready for it. It's an important point there. What are some things that we're looking for in the biomechanics so that we can analyze their movement, help them solve problems, and through some good feedback. So what are some common things that you see with new riders that are learning to rotate, Paul, that we need to, as coaches, we need to address?
I think one of the real common ones is the different parts of the body moving in unison together is number one. And then number two, how are they rotating? So often the kind of the words we use, like twist your hips or rotate your body, we're not really explaining or defining precisely what we mean by that from a biomechanical point of view. And you hit the nail on the head. Like coaches sometimes do find this a bit harder to teach, and that's because it is such a biomechanical skill, and the nuances and details of those biomechanics are important to get right. And if we don't, then you can think that you're teaching quote unquote rotation, but maybe you're missing the mark. So the key with the rotation is, I often talk with hips, it's actually as much, if not more, of a lateral movement than it is a rotational movement. So if you imagine the rider just standing in a neutral position, or let's say the ready position, kind of a lower, wider, chin over stem, kind of your classic cornering position, flatter back, strong legs. If they just twist their hips, they'll often kind of keep the hips somewhat over the seat or over the frame of the bike. But what we're actually wanting to see is if you kind of imagine a bird's eye view looking down onto a rider, you don't actually want to see their hips just twist above the seat. You want to see their hips move in an arc, like a banana-shaped arc from left to right. So let's say the rider, if we're looking down bird's eye view on a rider and they're turning left, we want to see their hips move out to the right, but twist to the left. So their belly button is pointing left into the turn, but they've moved their hips to the right and the outside of the bike. So it's that lateral movement that often either gets missed in the coaching and or gets missed by the rider in their understanding of it. So a lot of the time we'll talk about things like, we'll play silly analogies like going around a berm or a corner. You can imagine you've got your fans on the outside of the berm and they just want to give you a little high five slap on your butt as you ride by. I got that from a women's camp I was coaching a couple of years ago. They were telling me about that analogy that they use for their friends, and it was pretty funny at the time, making them all laugh. But you can use whatever analogy you want. Like the one I classically tend to use is like a bit like a hip check. If I'm turning left on my bike, I'm gonna move my hips to the right, almost like I'm gonna hip check someone on my right, as I'm obviously twisting my body to look to the left. So I think number one, it's that lateral component of the rotation. It's the hips moving along an arc. And I think number two, it's everything moving together. So the steering is that's often overlooked. If we steer into the turn, we should steer with the head, handlebars, and shoulders all moving together. And if I'm starting a left-hand turn, I'm going to turn my head. Obviously, the handlebars will turn a little bit. My shoulders are going to turn a little bit. And then I let my hips carry on that rotational momentum, and then I let my hips rotate out to the right. It's everything moving together. So that would probably be the second piece. So number one is the lateral piece of the rotation. And then number two is the whole body moving together. Sometimes they'll just they won't really twist their shoulders or their knees, and they'll kind of kink at the waist, and they'll try and sort of stick their hips out to the side, but nothing else is moving. So they get this sort of kink in their side. And you can see that pretty clearly. So those would be two things I would probably highlight as the key pieces to look for.
Yeah. I like the idea of connect the head to the feet in your movement. Yeah. So that's all those planes are together. There's a box from your shoulders to your hip joints to your knees, and your feet and head it's all connected together.
Totally.
Often when we see rotation that is not in the lateral rail kind of movement that you're describing, you often see a dipping in the shoulders, and other kind of upper body movements that it's compensating for for things not moving together. And it
starts to look really disjointed and awkward.
It's very awkward. And the challenging thing for coaches is then to figure out what it is they're seeing and deliver some quality feedback that's actually solution oriented, for that rider. And I think that one of the places we can start with this is really having our own self-awareness on how we make these movements.
Yeah.
It's imperative if we're coaching somebody on rotation, and I would argue pretty much everything else, that we know the insides and outs of how to do this and how it feels.
Yeah.
How does it feel to rotate when I'm all connected, and then have some, some analogies and whatnot, but also then being able to really look at the rider without saying anything and deliver some very quick feedback. Kind of curious for you, maybe talk about different kinds of feedback, maybe not the content of the feedback, but different kinds of feedback you might use for teaching rotation.
Yeah, for sure. I think because it's biomechanical, it can get complex, but it can also be really simple. And I find coaches, when there's an opportunity to teach something that's potentially more complex, is the feedback follows that, and then it just becomes a bit overwhelming for the coach and or the student. But I really like just a very simple, direct style of feedback, which simply highlights here's what to address. So it's not a negative feedback. It's not this sort of super fluffy solution based. Here's a what, why, how of what you're doing well. Here's how to improve. Here's a tactic to try. It can just be very short and sweet. So I quite like direct feedback in that. Say you're teaching someone rotation and you're focusing on the hips, but they're not moving. They're pinching at the waist and they're not moving the hips out to the side enough. Just doing great. Let's turn the shoulders and let your hips go out to the side more. Here, let me show you. So all I'm doing is prescribing the one or two bullet points that will help. Here, let's try and turn the shoulders more. Let's move the hips to the side more. Here, let me show you. So I think what really helps teaching biomechanical skills is short, sweet feedback, and then showing them, because showing them that visual will give them more feedback than you say anyway. And showing them that visual is building that. I mean, there's a lot of science behind that, but if you can visualize something, you're a lot more able to do it yourself. And when you're trying to learn complex body movements where different parts of the body have to move in unison, visualization is a huge tool to do that efficiently and effectively. So the main kind of tactic I use for feedback is short and sweet, and then showing them as best as you can. And sometimes be short and sweet with also what they need to stop doing, or what they maybe potentially, quote unquote, are doing wrong. Don't be afraid of that. It's just all about how we say it. Hey, Tim, doing great, buddy. Let's keep the pedals level. We don't need to drop them just yet. Let's keep it more simple. Here, let me show you. Don't be afraid to just, hey, stop doing this. Or another example with rotation that's really common is students will start thinking about rotating their hips or the knees, whatever it is, and then their body position will start to regress. And so they'll stop bending at the waist and their shoulders will be too high. So I might say, hey, Sally, nice work. Let's just remember to keep the shoulders low. Here, let me show you. All right. And then I might come back after my demo and say, that's really important, because if my shoulders are low, it helps me keep my hips back. And then when I move my hips out to the side, I really feel a lot more stable and balanced. But if I'm moving my hips out to the side and my shoulders are high, it can feel really awkward. So sometimes I might just split up my feedback, my verbal feedback. I might just say one piece and then I'll show it. And then I might say the second or third piece of my feedback after that demo. So just little tools and tactics, but long story short, trying to keep the talking concise and precise. And then when possible, just try and give them feedback through visuals, through showing them.
Excellent. Something I noted here that I really like is, just because something is complex doesn't mean that we have to make it complex.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't get in your own way.
Exactly. One of the couple things I use, especially with rotation, is from having somebody that's had some success, then maybe things aren't working. Let's get them off the bike.
Yeah. Huge.
Get them off the bike and let's do some different kinds of rotation and maybe explore, different sequences and what being in unison means and all that. And then back to the bike. Also, this is an excellent opportunity to use video.
Video is huge.
Yeah. And so that way, especially if you have a, larger screen where you can draw on it, and just being able to show like angles and it can be very, very profound for the writer.
And that's partly why you want to demonstrate your feedback, because hopefully then you're constantly showing them a more ideal image.
Yeah.
So then when you show them your video of them doing it, hopefully they've got a clearer sense of, oh, hang on, I don't look like Christian. I look like there's something missing there. What's missing, right? So you're constantly trying to provide that visual coaching.
Yep, absolutely. Hey, any closing thoughts on rotation before we talk about donuts?
Just real quick, like this, you mentioned the static stuff off the bike, and I think that's a huge component of teaching rotation, because it really is a safe and easy way to get them to understand and feel the biomechanics without obviously being on the bike. So a couple quick examples. Sometimes I'll get them to stand next to the bike, put the front brake on, and just lift the rear wheel a little bit. So they're on the ground, they're standing next to the bike, but they've just sort of lifted the rear wheel in the air. And then I'll get them to look, steer, and twist to one direction. So say, like, pretend they're turning right. So I'll get them to look, steer, and turn to the right. And then with their bum, their hips, move them out to the side and move that back wheel out to the left. And so the bike will end up pivoting on the front wheel as they kind of steer and push. But that's just one example of a static drill that can help them feel how the hips are actually moving out to the side. And because they're using their hips to push the back wheel out to the side, they can really feel the muscles engaged to do that. And a lot of the time when I do that static drill, the first thing that people will do is they'll just move the hips. So they'll kind of so they'll kink in the waist somewhere, and their shoulders will be facing one direction and then their hips facing the other direction. But the back wheel has gone out to the side. So it's a great example of how, look, you've twisted and moved the hips out to the side, but your front wheel's actually going in the opposite direction, as are your shoulders. So let's do that again. But now let's steer with the bars, turn to the right, move your hips out to the left. But now your belly button's pointing to the right. And let's get everything to turn around that right-hand corner together. So that static drill is a really good one there. And the second one I think that's good is standing over the frame of the bike. Most riders are tall enough. And tapping the inside leg onto the frame, number one. And then number two, tapping the kneecap into the frame. And when they tap the kneecap into the frame, they all notice that, what did you have to do that? They had to twist their hips. And so that gets them to really realize just how they can move and control their hips independently. But again, as soon as they do that, they kind of kink at the frame. And so their hips and knees have twisted, but their shoulders aren't twisted. So I'll say, do it again, but this time I want your head and your shoulders and the bars to turn as you tap that outside knee into the frame, and then notice that the whole body now is rotating together. So a little bit of creativity and a little bit of understanding the biomechanics, and you can take your students through some very helpful static drills and if you're not a coach, just trying them at home on your own in the garage or in the driveway. You can try these things as a way to sort of feel and think about and process these movements when you're not on the bike.
Excellent. Paul, this has been another fantastic conversation about rotation. I just love how deep we can get into just one component of a skill. So
totally.
Cool.
I mean, we could probably do another hour on rotation easy. And it is one of my favorite ones to teach, because riders are shredding at this stage. They're confident, and sometimes they're even a bit cynical of how much can you really teach me? Like, how much better can I really get?
Right.
And boy, do they find out.
Yeah, those are great moments. It's rewarding as a coach when you're able to kind of break through that piece, and for the rider as well. And it kind of signals that you've really never done learning.
Oh, yeah.
And that's so exciting. Like when you come to that realization.
Yeah, and even for me as a coach, anytime I teach this, every time I'm like, oh man, I need to work on this.
Well, it reminds me, it's kind of like having a donut. You're like, that's the best donut I've ever had. And you're like, you've had all the donuts, but there's just more. They're everywhere.
You've never had all the donuts.
You've never had all the donuts.
Yeah. Hey, we should make a t-shirt out of that.
That's a
great idea for a t-shirt.
Never had all the donuts. I still can't get over the donut with the latte in it.
My God. I still have daydreams about that. We should tell people about the kilogram donut.
I was going to ask if you would, because we talked about crocodile. I mentioned Crocodile Dundee, but I don't think we ever connected the dots, and I don't know if listeners know what that's in reference to.
Yeah. So that's at Kenilworth Bakery again when I was in Australia. But there was that awesome picture on the side of the wall, like, that's not a donut, this is a donut, which I just love, because Crocodile Dundee is a pretty awesome movie. But yeah, so this place, listeners might have seen on social media, but if you haven't, this bakery regularly has 1 kilogram donuts. And if you eat it all, you get it for free. And what was crazy was, I'll find some pictures and I'll post them on the Instagram account. I can't believe the amount of people that have eaten this kilogram donut. Because if you do, you get your name on a little silver plate, and then they put it up around the bakery. I couldn't believe it. It was insane how many people have eaten a kilogram donut. But so we ordered one. You have to order them ahead of time. And it was just a classic kind of cream and strawberry jam donut. And the kids were like, "Are you going to do it, Daddy? Are you going to eat this?" And I was like, no way am I eating a kilogram donut. Even me, like, I've been known to eat 2 or 3 donuts in a row on occasion, but like, I'm not going to eat a kilogram donut. But the thought did cross my mind. But but we also ordered those coffee latte donuts at the same time. So not only did we have a kilogram donut, Shannon and I each had a coffee donut. So I was like, there's no way I can eat the kilogram donut now. So between the 4 of us, me and my wife and my 2 kids, we split up the kilogram donut, and we still didn't finish it. Yeah, I had about a third. Huxley had almost as much as me, and then Shannon and Summer shared the rest of it. But it was so good. I was expecting this kilogram donut to be a bit kind of sickly or a bit rubbish, but it was still one of the nicest donuts I've ever had. Like, this fresh cream, it was like homemade strawberry jam, and the dough was just so fluffy and nice. Like, I was amazed how much of it I ate, because it was such a good donut. And even Huxley was like, "I can't believe I ate all that." And he was like sick for the rest of the day. Like, he was just stumbling around Australia Zoo, just like, "I feel so sick, Daddy." I was like, "Well, you ate the same as me, dude, and you're like half my size." But it was so good. It was such a nice donut. But yeah, and we still had a bit left over, and we had to throw it away. But I can't imagine who finished that a kilogram of donut. But we tried, and we failed, but it was a lot of fun trying, that's for sure.
That is an awesome story. Was it what flavor? It was like kind of flavor profile?
It was like it was cinnamon sugar with cream, and then cream and jam inside. So it's like pretty classic donut.
That's my kind of donut.
Oh, it was just it was so good. And I think we ate salad. I ate salad for like 3 days after that.
Kale, Brussels sprouts.
Yeah. I think the next day I went for a run and just ate salad. I was like, oh my God. But it was worth it. Totally worth it.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. This brings us to the end of another episode of Donuts and Bikes. We hope this conversation elevated your understanding about rotation from a rider or a coach's perspective. We like to think that riding bikes isn't rocket science, but it's just bike science. So get out there, ride smart, coach smarter, and don't forget to have fun and eat donuts.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show and that it sparked some ideas for your riding and your coaching. As always, our approach to coaching is on pros and cons, not rights and wrongs. And with that in mind, our podcast is meant to be more of a conversation about topics and techniques rather than a final say in how to ride or how to teach.
As always, please take care if using or applying any of the techniques discussed in this podcast. Stay safe, ride smart, and we'll see you next time.